In this video, I want to review the types of reading that we want you to do and practice in the course of these manuals. We want you to get better at controlling the flood of information, and these are techniques that you should use in order to be able to get through the material faster and economically in a way that allows you to take something out of the experience away with you after you've gone through the book. So we use these terms, and I want to take time in this manual to just review a little bit and remind you of the terms. So standard reading is the pace that you read at naturally, and it's relevant to you or related to you. So your standard reading is going to be different from mine and from another person's, because we all have different reading speeds and that we're comfortable with, depending on the background and how familiar we've been with the text as we've had our formative early year education. So the way you recognize what your standard speed is, it's just how fast do you read? How do you read when nobody's looking? When it's not for an assignment, it's just something you like to do. You grab hold of your favorite whatever, and you just sit down and read it. The point about standard reading for people at this point in their education is that it's whatever pace that allows you to not to forget that you're reading, right? So you pick up a book and you start engaging with the content, and if at whatever rate you engage with the content, you can stop thinking about the actual words on the page and how to pronounce them, and you just get the meaning, and you can do that without even being aware that you're actually like reading a book. Of course, you're reading a book, but you're not constantly thinking about the act of reading, because the act of reading at that point is so natural to you. It's like breathing or walking. I don't know how many of us today thought about our rate of breathing and say, well, maybe I should slow it down and speed it up. Maybe you did, but for the most part, we tend to breathe at a certain rate that we just are used to. And the same with walking or walking speed. We don't go around the day thinking, I'm walking now. Now I am walking. Now I am walking. We just do it, and we don't think about it. So when you read something and you just do it without thinking about it, that's your standard speed. Now, there is a very familiar term, a phrase called speed reading, that people will link up to the act of reading, or one of the strategies. And I don't really recommend it. People that try to find out how many words they can read a minute, and then they're trying to improve on that, very, very often it devolves into just trying to become faster than everyone else. And sometimes you're not really getting much out of the experience at all. I don't know. I feel like the only legitimate place in the schema that we're using for speed reading is what you do when you're trying to increase the speed of your standard reading. Okay, so speed reading would just be going to your standard rate and just trying to read a little bit faster, so that it's not uncomfortable, but you can realize that you're trying to speed up just a little bit. Okay, speed reading really is most effective over a long period of time and through very small increments. So you just read just a little bit faster, but you're still trying to read just like you would read in a regular way, in terms of getting the words and getting the content. And you're just trying to speed it up just a little bit, and you stay at that rate for maybe 6 months, consciously trying to go at that new speed until it becomes your new normal. Okay, then you probably should spend another 6 months just establishing it as your new normal, and then you should pick it up a little bit more so that you can go a little bit faster. Now, everyone is going to have a natural limit. Once you find that, you should just stay there. You might be at your natural limit already. So speed reading is something that it might not even be worth trying. Honestly, speed reading to me is always a practice activity that is meant to make your standard reading a little bit faster. So some questions to consider is, why would you want to be faster? Maybe you're not having to work through a lot of material right now. So that's let's just get speed reading out of the way, and I don't really want it to use it as a strategy in these manuals, other than if you want to, you can try to make your standard rate go a little faster. But um, now slow reading is when you really slow down. There are no mysteries to these terms, but when you are reading material that is meant to be heard or meant to be uh, read at a cadence or a rhythm like poetry, or think of music. How much do you lose when you just turn off the music and you just read the lyrics? You don't get the song. So a lot of poetry is kind of like, especially the older poetry, it was meant to be read aloud. Some versions of the Bible were meant to be read aloud. So the slow reading would be to slow things down a bit so that you can hear the form of the words, so you can hear the beauty of the language, so you can think carefully about it. So sometimes it's just simply that, a slower pace so that you can enjoy the beauty of the actual language. But for our purposes here, slow reading is going to mean that you take a rather big book and you just read it 2 pages a night for 2 years. Or you can take a very thick, well, not thick, but a very conceptually heavy book, say one of Plato's dialogues, let's say the Parmenides, and you really want to try to understand this thing, man, and it's challenging, and you're like, well, I might just read a paragraph a day, but I'm going to really focus on that paragraph. I'm going to take it super slow and think about it. And so sometimes you need to slow way down because this is very challenging conceptual material. And you need to realize this book of 40 pages is going to take me half a year to read at this rate. And then you should decide whether it's worth it or not. But sometimes that's really the best way to access this material. Not very few books are like this, but they're out there, and that's the way you need to handle it. So there's standard reading, speed reading, slow reading. There's sound reading, which I like to get the S's aligned here. That's the only reason I don't call it audiobooks. But sound reading is listening through audiobooks. And, we've been asking you to do that so you get into the habit of trying to pay attention and trying to get through a book or through a material while you're doing something else physically with your hands that will allow you to think about the book as you do this activity, like cleaning, exercising, there are all sorts driving. There are all sorts of things that we can just do mechanically, more or less, and have something playing at the same time, and we can pay attention to both because they're involving different. It seems like they're involving different types of attention, But so audiobooks, sound reading. So standard reading, speed reading, slow reading, sound reading. Okay. Now let's talk about skimming. Okay, skimming is, you're looking at a chapter and you literally just start letting your eyes. There's really no other word, skim, but let's say just zoom through the page, because you kind of know how the story is going to go or what the chapter is about, but you're just kind of making sure, if you will, and you're just making sure that your preconceived notion is going to align with what is there. And so if you just let your eyes drop down the page, if you will, sometimes if you have the page of your text, sometimes skimming can go diagonally down like that, or sometimes it could be right in the middle and just go down. Just drop it down, and you're just looking for key terms, and you're trying to use your peripheral vision, but you're really moving through those lines fastly because you're kind of just looking for something. The best way to think about skim reading is to imagine a situation where you're trying to remember where, like, let's say a certain quote was, or a certain story, or a certain piece of dialogue, or a certain part, a certain part of the story. Maybe where the character did this, or where the author talked about that, and you're remembering this, and you're like, well, I know it's in here somewhere, and then you start skimming for it, right? You're not reading. You're just looking for words. You're basically focusing on words, and you get enough of these words that you can kind of put them together in something of a linear fashion and kind of get a sense of the message, but you are moving through that material, okay? So we're going to ask you to practice skimming. And we don't want it to be so fast that you're not getting anything, but we want you to say, don't read this regularly. Don't try to vocalize the words, or in other words, hear the words in your mind. Let your eyes move across that page and just see if you can kind of get a sense as you pick up this thing and this thing and this thing, and maybe you pick up 4 or 5 things a page. Can you weave them together and sense that you are getting the very basic picture of that page or that couple of pages? That's skimming, and it is possible to do. And once you get better at that, you realize that you can read 1 or 2 pages of a chapter and then skim the rest, especially if you realize that the author is working in some sort of formulaic fashion where they first maybe describe a general principle in the chapter, then they give one example, and then they give multiple other examples. And if the chapter is like that, you can just read the description and maybe half of the first, skim it, really quickly read the first example, and then you can skim the rest because all the chapters are kind of like the same. So skimming will come in handy. Now, when you do skimming and some of the others we talked about, you are not getting 100% of the text by any means. Okay, so don't operate under that illusion. You are looking at a book of 300 pages, and you've got 2 hours to get a gist of what this book is about. You're probably going to read like 10 pages here. You got to pick those pages carefully. The intro, some part, maybe part of the first chapter, maybe part of the last chapter. Anything in the book that kind of gives you an overview, and then you skim. You just basically look at chapter titles, you look at pictures, you look at charts, you look at and as you glance through pages, you're looking at any sort of thing that is going to give you an idea of what the book is about, right? Now, sometimes the book is formatted by the publisher and the press to use things like section headings and subsection headings. And you have this displayed to you in terms of bold or capital letters or indents or whatnot, right? And so there are times when those markers are given to you, and you can skim those, the headings, the subheadings, the section headings, and you get a pretty good idea of what the chapter is about. And you can do that if you realize, I don't have time to read this whole book, but I would like to read some of it, and I would like the parts that I read to give me a good idea of the author's goals and intentions, the way this person writes, and really what the book is about. So that will help you move through material, and it's something you can practice and get better at. Okay, so that's skimming. And then what the next thing I want to talk about is spot reading. Okay, so when you do spot reading, you are literally picking spots of the book to read. It's as simple as that. Okay, so skimming would be, let's say you have a chapter of 30 pages. Skimming would be to start at the beginning of the chapter and kind of move really, really quickly through those pages, just looking for names and terms and phrases, catching enough on the page so that by the time you're at page 5 or 6 of that chapter, you kind of got an idea what the chapter is about and where it's going, right? So that's skimming. But spot reading would be something like, I'm just going to pick up this book and I'm going to open it up and I'm going to read the first page I get, and then I'll open it up again and I'll read the next page. I might jump from page 5 to page 30 to page 53 to page 58 to page 72, and I might just read half of these pages. That's spot reading. Okay. Now, what sort of information do you get when you do spot reading? The readability of the book, the type of language or vocabulary the author is using, the style of the author, the types of claims. When you do spot reading, you can find a couple claims, a couple statements that will kind of start showing you the thought process of the author. How careful are they with their evidence? How careful are they with the statements they're making? Are they overgeneralizing? Are they too simplistic? Are they refusing to really recognize the complexity of some things? You can tell a lot once you get better at this. Okay, but spot reading is very jumpy. Okay, it's there's no rhyme or reason to it other than you start at the beginning and you end up at the end, but you're just basically moving the pages, chunks of pages, and you're just reading whatever your eye lands on. And it's hit or miss, right? That you're ever going to find anything that this can work. But trust me, you'll begin to understand how authors and press has organized material, and that fits into a couple templates. And once you realize what type of book you're looking at, you can start guessing at where the information is going to be in terms of the layout of the page, and you can go to those spots, and you'll begin to realize that actually helps. You'll get more than you thought, right? Again, you're doing spot reading basically only to see if the book is worth your time, right? And I'll do that a ton because I could easily get 20 books in front of me, and I need to find the one or two that's going to help me grow because they're interesting, they're readable, and they just capture my attention. So I need to be able to go through those books very quickly. All right. So I'm not at all pretending to have read the book. When I do spot reading or skimming, I don't go around telling people that I read the book. I say that I'm familiar with the book or that I know some parts of it. I can talk about it a little bit, but I'm never going to pretend to know the book more than, or the movie, the text more than I really do, right? But those are the terms that we want to really focus on here. Okay, standard reading, and if you want to kind of make a new standard and go a little bit faster, you can employ the technique of speed reading. Which, when you do speed reading, you really are trying to read every word, just like you would do standard reading. Okay, but then you can slow way down when you realize you need to think about things, and why not take 2 years? Why not? Where are you going to be in 2 years? You're either going to be dead or alive. If you're dead, hopefully you're in heaven, and maybe you're reading the book there. But whether or not you finish this book or not is probably going to be a moot point at that point. If you're alive, then you're still working through the book. You see what I'm saying? And so it can be very effective when it's challenging material and it's hard to read and it's hey, why don't you just read half a page a day, 5 days a week? Okay, so that's your slow reading. Then you have sound reading, which is audiobooks. Then you have skimming. Okay, then you have spot reading. Okay, and the last one I want to throw at you is not really reading at all, but it's called summary reading. It's when you have a book and you're like, I don't know if any of these techniques are going to work, so let me go find a book review. Let me find a summary about the book. So at that point, you go outside of the book and you try to find a 2 or 3 page or a 5-paragraph summary of the book online, and you get it that way. So, all right, I really want you to know these words because we've used them before. We're going to use them again, and in fact, in many manuals, we'll ask you to skim half of the book because we want you to practice that. Okay, please don't think we're just like, oh, whatever, we're done with the book, but why don't we just let them? No, when we say skim, I'm saying you got to practice this. When I say spot read, I want you to think, what is spot reading? And how do I do it? And then practice, and then reflect on it in your journal or something and say, did that work? Why didn't it work? Is it worth trying to learn how to do this? You got to be critically evaluating these things. But these are standard practices we want you to practice. And we're very specific on that. All right. So there'll be times when you practice every one of these. So, okay. Hey, thank you for watching.